All right, so in the previous chapters, we've talked about our food cost, our beverage cost, and now we're going to focus on labor cost. So as we move through this chapter, we're going to talk about what makes up our total labor cost, different ways that we can measure our productivity with regards to our labor, how we can start controlling those labor costs, and then also about scheduling and how we manage our payroll records, and then optimizing our labor product. So the first thing is we have to understand what exactly is covered in the cost of labor. Now remember, we have our variable costs when it comes to labor. Those are our wages. And then we have our fixed costs, which are our salaries. And so this is one reason why labor is considered semi-variable, because it includes both fixed costs and variable costs. And so that's why we call it a semi-variable cost. The other things that are included in labor that I don't think a lot of people think of are the taxes. Okay, and so we have unemployment tax, we have FICA, we have the Social Security. All of those taxes are things that, in addition to the employee paying into, the employer also pays. So when we think about, controlling our labor costs, especially with our wages, our employees that we pay a wage to, not only are we going to save the cost in what we would pay them for their wage per hour, but we're also saving the cost on those taxes that we're not going to incur. So the relationship between labor costs and our business volume, as our business volume increases, our labor should also increase. It takes more people to run and operate the business, the busier it is. But if our business is low, our volume is low, then our labor should also be low. And so this is why, if you've ever worked waiting tables, oftentimes, or even in the kitchen, as the business volume slows down, we start sending people home. We start cutting people from the floor. And so when I was working at TGI Fridays, we actually had a diagram of the floor. There was a booklet, and if there was, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tables, okay? Let's say we started off with 2 people on the floor. Let's say 3 people. So we had section 1, section 2, section 3. So 1, 2, 3, okay? Each person had 2 tables. But as the business volume starts declining and we don't, maybe it's not as busy, we're off of our peak time, then we might consider going to a 2-section floor. And then that way we know that actually what we could do, just to keep it simple, is divide our floor like this, whereas we know that this table, once section 3 is dissolved, this table becomes part of section 2, and this table becomes part of section 1. That way they maintain the same original 2 tables, and that way we know when the floor changes, we know exactly what tables belong to each server. And then maybe we can get to a point where there's just one server that's taking care of all 6 tables, or maybe one person closes. So it really kind of just depends on what the business is like. So when we think about our productivity, remember we can use our labor cost percentage. So just like we have our pyramid for food cost and beverage cost, we can do the same thing. Our labor cost, percentage, and our total sales volume. Okay, so remember our labor cost is going to be anywhere between 30 to 35%. We want to keep it as low as possible. The lower we can keep it, the more profit we're going to get. But just like our food costs, where we want to make sure that the ingredients meet the quality for the price we're paying, we want to make sure that our labor is, we don't sacrifice service to save on labor. And so we want to make sure that we have enough labor to operate the restaurant or the hotel or whatever effectively and still maintain the level of service, the level of quality of service. Other ways we can identify our productivity when it comes to labor. Remember, anytime I use these future examples, this word per means the division sign. Okay, so this is guests served per labor hour. Okay, so we have our total sales per labor hour. Okay, we have our total labor hours to work for the week is 1,098. Our sales for the week was 39,542. So our sales per labor hour, sales per labor hour is $36.01 per labor hour. Now these are just numbers. It really just depends on the operation. What is a good number? Obviously, we want to make sure that our sales per labor hour is obviously higher than what we're paying per labor hour. We want to make sure we're making some money there. But this is one way we can look and see what our productivity level of the labor hours. If this number is decreasing, that may mean that we're having too many people on the shift. And we need to start sending people home on a regular basis. A cover is a guest, okay, so covers per labor hour. In this case, in that 7-day period, we had 2,297 guests, and we had the same 1,098. So the number of covers divided by the labor hours for the week was 2.09 covers, which basically means that for every labor hour, we covered two guests. Now, depending on the level of service of the restaurant, if you're an extreme high fine dining restaurant, then 2 covers per hour may be appropriate. If you are a fast food restaurant, then 2.9 people per labor hour probably would not be a good number. So with this one, we're looking at our covers per labor dollar. So the money that we spent was $12,176, and we served 2,297. So our covers per, remember dividing sign, the labor dollar gives us 1.188 covers per labor dollar. So that's less than 1 cover that we served per dollar that we spent on labor. Now, if we want to look and see if we're being effective with our labor dollars, then we can flip this one and we can do our labor cost per cover. And so in this case, we have $12,176 that we spent to serve 2,297 guests. So that means it cost us $5.30 per cover in the labor cost. Now, labor cost is going to include not just servers, it's also going to include kitchen staff, the dishwashers, the host and hostess, so all the labor dollars that we have. So we want to make sure that this, if we're going to be remaining profitable, that this number is also as low as possible to make sure that we are not exceeding our labor costs. So we can use our forecast. That's how we predict what our labor is what labor we're going to need. So we forecast our volume just like we would do for the amount of product to purchase. We would forecast the volume, determine what our budget is overall for labor, the hours that we're allowed to give. Then we're actually going to schedule the employees. And then when we're done, we're going to validate what those forecasted costs were. So did we have enough in our budget? Did we forecast well or did we not? And so we're going to adjust that in the future. So things that affect our sales, obviously the volume that we have. If an area is experiencing increased tourism or decrease in tourism, if there is, lower unemployment rates, the economy is doing well, then that's going to affect how many people are coming to eat in the restaurant. So as you can probably imagine right now, and maybe some of you have experienced, a lot of the restaurants and hotels and whatnot are minimizing their labor budget, and they're basically operating on a skeleton crew, on a bare minimum crew, to make sure that they are still remaining profitable, because the volume is not high enough to merit keeping every single person on staff. And so we want to make sure that we're looking at those different trends, that we are considering those aspects to make sure that we are forecasting appropriately. So we look at our labor budget, okay? We can, again, as forecasting is going to be an estimate, so we can put in as a percentage what we want to have. So if our forecasted sales is $1.45 million here, then if our labor expense is going to be $29,000, then this means our budget for the entire year is going to be $420,500 for budget. Then we have to divide that budget by the months out of the year and the weeks out of the year. So of course we would assume that spring break is going to be much busier than the first or second week in January. So our labor budget is going to be divided based on sales volumes of things that are happening within the city and the area that we're in. So as we are looking at the number of labor hours needed in creating our schedules, it's important to realize that we don't need to bring every single employee in at the exact same time. We can stagger people's as they come into the restaurant as far as the schedule. So this right here, this master schedule kind of shows how we have server A comes in. Let's look at first the total covers. So we're anticipating 15 covers at 10 a.m., 75 at 11. We can look at our past sales volume to get this information. And then you can see as the afternoon goes on, we get less and less covers. So of course, server A could potentially take care of 15 guests at one time. And so for that reason, they can just come in by themselves. And then as we get busier, we'll bring in the other servers, and as we remain busy, but then when we come down to it, we can send 2 servers home. And you can do this in a variety of different ways. You can keep server A from start to finish, or because server A came in, you could let them go, and you could keep server B and C. Really kind of whatever policy and procedure that you have is what you would follow in this case. So now we have the master schedule for the entire restaurant. The first part was just the servers. So you'll see the servers don't need to come in between 8 and 9 a.m. because the restaurant isn't open yet. You might have a server come in right before you open just to make sure everything for the night before was set up correctly for the dining room. But if not, you can bring them in right when the restaurant opens. The host and cashier would also come in right when this restaurant opens to make sure everything is good to go. And so then you can see we don't need to have our dishwasher come in and our busser come in until 11, because there's really not a whole lot for them to do when these first 15 people are coming in. And so staggering the entry times, the times that people come in to work, is one of the best ways that we can manage our labor budget. So even same thing with our cooks. Our cooks will come in at 8, and then we'll have a second cook come in at 9 to finalize, and then they're there. And then you'll see that cook 1 leaves an hour earlier because they came in an hour earlier. So then we take our total hours that we worked times the rate that we worked. So this is just like costing out a recipe, right? The total hours needed, the rate, and this is our payroll expenses. Okay. And And so in addition to this $276.95, we also have taxes that we would pay on top of that as well. So we want to make sure that we're being fair and we're being equitable. So someone who is a great server that's going to help us with as far as upselling and whatnot is going to be someone who would be maybe a seniority level and they may have priority in shifts. Newer people typically will have the other shifts. I don't want to say less desirable shifts, but typically the longer you've been at a place, that seniority provides you the opportunity to have first pick or those premium shifts. And so we want to make sure that that with the crew schedule that we're being fair and equitable, that we are looking at making sure that that all the shifts are covered, that that we're not just giving one employee the most hours, that we are, again, being fair and equitable with that. So as far as our payroll records, we have timesheets, we might have a time card, or we might even have electronic records. So a timesheet is just a piece of paper where somebody is going to write their name and when they came in, when they left, and how many hours. A time card is going to be where someone's actually going to punch basically punch the clock. So they take their time card, whether it's, excuse me, whether it's an actual card that they can, put into a unit on the wall, or a table that will punch the time that they enter, the time that they leave. If we can do some kind of electronic version of that, it's going to help us identifying with overtime. If something's on a timesheet and we're not checking it on a regular basis, then there's that potential that somebody might go into overtime, and we don't necessarily want that unless our business volumes warrant the need to have overtime. And so the last thing I want to talk about is how we can optimize our labor productivity. So of course, I know most of the time on the job training, OTJ, that's typically how we do training in the hospitality industry. Say, hey, jump on the line, start doing this, follow this recipe, or follow this server and watch what they do. And so with training, the more effective our training program is. I know at both Fridays and Cheesecake Factory, we had classroom time. So we actually sat in a classroom type setting and we learned different things and different aspects of the job as a server. And then we went out and did on the job training where we shadowed. So training happens before, ideally, and coaching happens during. And so coaching is where I've used the example quite a bit where I used to forget at TGI Fridays how to ask people for their meat temperature, how they wanted their steaks cooked. And so because I kept forgetting to do that, my manager pulled me aside and she coached me to say, what can we do to help you not forget these particular items? And so with that, that was something that you do one-on-one with those employees to help improve their productivity. This might be coaching that you can offer ideas to how to better sell and how to better upsell, and different techniques and different methods to do that. And the very last thing I want to talk about is our employee turnover rate. Okay, so our employee turnover rate, we want to take the number of employees we hired for the year, for the period. Let's just use the year. And we're going to divide that by the number of employees needed. Okay, so let's just use a couple of examples. Let's say in the year I hired 250 employees. Okay, and it requires about 100 employees for me to operate my restaurant appropriately, effectively. That means 250 divided by 100 gives me 2.5, and as a percentage, when we move that decimal place over 2, we realize that this represents 250% turnover rate. Okay, 250% turnover rate. That's, in our industry, we are known for having relatively high turnover rates. People get frustrated with their bosses. They get frustrated with maybe the hours that they're getting. There's lots of different things that factor into why people leave their jobs. Now, let's think about this for a second. If it cost me $200 to hire somebody, okay, that's the cost of advertising the open position. That's the cost of the time for a manager to interview the applicants. That's the cost of the time for training, because they're working, you're paying them, but yet they're not generating revenue because they're not out on the floor selling, or they're not in the kitchen producing food. So let's say it cost us $200 to hire somebody. So if I had to hire 250 employees, then essentially it cost me $50,000 during this year to hire 250 employees. Okay, $50,000 is quite a bit. But what would happen if, I'm going to use a different color now, what would happen if we were able to decrease this to 200%? Okay, so the difference between 250 and 200% is 50%. Okay, if it takes me 100 employees to operate my restaurant, then 50% times 100 gives me 50 employees. Okay, so that's 50 less employees that I've had to hire during the year. If we use that same $200, that's in a sense going to save me $10,000 in labor costs and labor expenses. So by decreasing our turnover rate, we could take that $10,000 and maybe reinvest it into employee appreciation programs to make sure that our employees stay with the restaurant or the hotel instead of choosing to leave. So we want to make sure that when we are looking at our productivity levels, that we want to understand that if we can reduce our turnover rate, meaning people leaving we have to rehire, then that's money that we're going to save that can be implemented in a lot of other ways, whether it's towards our profit or other types of employee appreciation events, to ensure that our team members know that they are appreciated and valued. So just got to keep that in mind as we're thinking about labor, because besides food and beverage, labor is the second largest cost of the operation.